Hello, welcome to Critical Witness. This is our first episode of 2022, and it's good to be back. We've had a decent break, and it's also good to welcome Mike DiVirgilio. And I actually didn't check. Have I pronounced that correctly?
No, you just follow the vowels.
Amazing.
People look at it and they go, and then it's the vowels. It's really pretty simple.
Fantastic. I'm glad I did that right. I fumbled Chad McIntosh's name last time, so we're good. That's a fairly straightforward name. Not quite sure how I did that. So we've got Dan, we've got Mike, and we're going to be talking about Christian parenting. And as Mike has written a book, so therefore he is an expert. Plus he's got older children than us, so he must have some experience that we can learn from. So we're just going to have a chat. If you're watching live, do feel free to ask us questions. And we'll try and engage them as we go. If you're watching it on demand, well, too bad. Your questions. Feel free to follow up by going to Mike's website, which is in the description.
And it's the first one of the year, so I hope I don't ruin your whole year.
Well, it can only go up if you do.
No pressure.
So there's nothing. There's no pressure at all. Cool, and good to see you. We've got Rebecca Davis from Bread of Life channel in our chat. So nice to see you. So Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself in a couple of minutes, and what led you to write this book.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me too. I really enjoy it. I love your podcast. You guys have fun and it's enjoyable and it's long form, and so you get to talk about stuff. So I really appreciate it, and thank you for what you do.
No worries.
So, that's good.
So
it's not
for
nice if someone does.
Got one. So way over here in Tampa, Florida. So so I grew up a Catholic, and thankfully, I mean, God was always after me, and I talk about in the book how when I was 13, I went outside and looked up, and basically my dad almost died in a car wreck. And I looked up and I said, well, gosh, I guess I must not mean anything, because if my dad died, I wouldn't be here. And I did a regress. And so I've always thought spiritually. And then when I went to college at the Arizona State University, because I was from LA, I became a Christian through a campus organization called the Navigators. And that was a great experience. But something changed when I came across Francis Schaeffer's The God Who Is There. And the Christianity I was born again into, because that's the phrase we used then, born again, was very sort of narrow and fundamentalistic. And then here's Schaeffer talking about Christianity and truth, the truth of applying to all of life. And I just loved it. And so that's where I got my start and interest in apologetics. And then after that, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. And then when I was 24, I met through a providential coincidence, quote unquote, a gentleman who became a mentor of mine. And he introduced me to Reformed theology, Calvinism, etc. And that was definitely an eye opener and upside down for me from kind of the things I intuited about Christianity. And long story short, he suggested I go to seminary and put me on a reading program, studying Greek as well. And in a couple of weeks, I decided I was going to do that. It was so, and I love to study. God's given me a hunger. And so I ended up going to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia. And that was back 100 years. Let's see how many years ago.
100 years ago.
Well, it's close. But no, actually Westminster didn't even get founded until 29. So so no, it was 86, 87. But thank God, because also providentially, my wife happened to be there at the same time. Now, she wasn't my wife. She wasn't my wife then.
Got you.
We do it in the right order here. So it's so funny, because I knew I was, going 2,500 miles from home, and I'm single. I'll never get married. I knew I would never get married. And she walks down in the first chapel, and I go, what's she doing here? And so we had a great courtship. I wrote a little book about that, in fact, because it was so fun. She was engaged to another guy who was in the military.
Controversial. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the people at
Well,
Westminster, it's a little small community. They were just they didn't really like what was going on. So yeah, but it was a blast. It was so fun, and God meant three little creatures to come along, and now be three big creatures. Gabrielle is my oldest, as I mentioned. She's 30 and she's in labor.
Oh,
So we're just waiting for
Congratulations.
the call.
Yeah, exciting.
It's a mind blower. Because it's yesterday. I can remember she was born. It's just like, as you get older, that passage of time gets trippier and trippier.
It does seem to be speeding up. So yeah.
Well, are you guys in your 30s?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. It doesn't really start. 40s is what.
Oh,
Not to be a know-it-all.
Is that time warp?
I remember when I was in my 30s, this guy said 5 years, and he goes, it was some conference. He goes, to you guys, it seems like a long time. I said, well, 5 years is a long time. Now 5 years was like 10 years. It's like nothing.
Just keep going.
So and then Adam is 26, and my youngest is going to turn 21 next week. So that's so I look at God's providence, the way I met and moved back there, and then it's beautiful. So I never, when I went to seminary, I just went basically to ground myself in theology and history and philosophy, and maybe go get a PhD. I was never the pastor type, bad habits, that kind of thing. So so I just never saw. In fact, I one of the counselors there said, if you don't feel called to be a pastor, don't. It's hard enough if you do.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I was like, okay. So I ended up working and a job in Pennsylvania, and then made my way into sales. And so today I sell technology for a small company out of Arizona, which I love, but it's very demanding. And so per the book, all my life so the only reason I became a Christian is because I believed it was true.
Right.
that's a good reason.
I had absolutely no interest if it wasn't. And so as I was introduced to Schaeffer, there are massive amounts of reasons why, I believe this, and none of them have to do with what Christianity can do for me. It's the fact that it's simply the truth about the nature of reality. So as my kids were growing up, that's what I taught them. It was just kind of like natural. In fact, I tell one story in the book, which was one of the great moments of my life. We're leaving church, and I'm always lecturing about the sermon or whatever. And he was 7 or 8 at the time, not Dominic, said, Dad, why are you always lecturing us? And I was taken aback. I was like, and Gabrielle chimes in. She goes, well, Dominic, Daddy's always teaching. I mean, really, got chills. It was like, yes, that's what I'm doing. And so, and it's they appreciate it. Don't lecture your children. I mean, I lecture them all the time, but it's to teach them. I actually respect their intelligence, if they're 5 or when they were, or 10 or whatever, And so in 2015, I read an article about a young lady who grew up in a Christian home. I mean, she was involved. She wasn't just like a 1 foot out the door teenager. She goes off to the University of Virginia and boom, abandons her faith, becomes an agnostic. And I was so ticked off, I'm going to write a blog post. And then I thought, why don't I write a book about that, about how I did that with my kids? Because in my heart, I believe that would never happen to my kids.
Right.
It just wouldn't. It'd be like them going from reality to non-reality. And now I've had pushback, and people like, well, are you saying you can guarantee this and you're in control of that? It's like, first of all, we can't guarantee anything, and we control nothing. So, but we live in a cause and effect universe. You reap what you sow. And so I'm just confident that, I've done a good enough job. In fact, my daughter, I'm not a very good, what's the word? Intentional about spiritual things with my growing up, like praying with them and devotionals and those kinds of things. I wish I was better, and I sort of bummed about it because I would really like to have been better. And my daughter once said to me, I was kind of complaining about myself, and she goes, well, at least you taught us it's the truth.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Because a lot of parents think if they just do the religious things,
yeah,
that, and as I argue in the book about talking about culture, it's just, they're assaulted from moment one with a whole other worldview. And if we don't enable them to decipher and interrogate these worldviews, all bets are off. Even if we take them to Sunday school and read the Bible to them and pray with them, and we got to engage that.
So it's basically a deconstruction article of someone going through.
It wasn't called that then.
It was, yeah. That's the new buzzword.
Yes,
that it is.
Exactly.
And so, does your book come with a 100% guarantee if it doesn't happen?
Absolutely. I should have put that on the cover. That would have been a big hit.
Not guaranteed to.
Well, see, I'm so the book isn't about parenting. So that's to clarify, because I hate 10 steps to this and 12 steps to that, and if you do that, you'll get that. And but yet people sort of interpret it that way, and I think I specifically believe that was people who never read it.
Right.
And so it's really an apologetics book for parents.
Cool.
Because just teaching, again, how do you teach your children that this is valid, this is true, it's credible, you can have confidence in it, and so on. So it's but it's the funnest, most greatest thing in the whole world to raise your kids to love Jesus and seek him. And
I think that's a really important starting point, though, is what you seem to be embodying is a joy about the truth. You can talk about truth and be extraordinarily dry, and this is what you have to do to in following that logic. This is true, therefore that's a really good point. I was talking to this gal yesterday. She actually we lived in Illinois for 17 years before we moved down here 4.5 years ago, and she started a podcast of testimonies, and she knows my wife, and so I'm going to get to do that in a couple months, which is really cool. Nice.
Because I haven't told my testimony in a long time, because it's a long time ago. So so her son was immersed in apologetics, the same age as my son, and she said he's sort of not walking with the Lord, and it's painful. But I told this to her, is that, and what you just said is so spot on, is because truth isn't a proposition, it's a person. And I say that in the book. It's logic, it is truth, it is propositions, proper. But when you understand that it is the truth, who he is, and he is the thing that makes all truth real. About, I was going to quote Lewis, but I can't remember. But it's so Lewis, reading him is humbling, because he was a genius, beyond genius. But I appreciate you noticing that, because it's powerful.
Yeah,
it's taught more than taught in a way.
Yeah.
Even though I teach obnoxiously much, to ask my kids, it's caught, because you can't help but just be.
Yeah. You embody that truth yourself. Dan, you look like you're about to say something profound.
No, I was just thinking. I was listening. No, I was just I think it's funny. I was chatting to someone about someone I was working with today about parenting and parenting books, and about being an authentic parent, and what that means. And I was it's funny how you said you don't like parenting. I don't like parenting books either, primarily because every child is different. And so you read a book by someone who has 2 or 3 children, but they're not your children. Right. And anyone with children knows, with more than one child, will know that you have the same genes, made the same way, and they end up they're
totally different.
Completely different. And so right. What works with one child is not necessarily effective in another. So I think when I've got
that's
a parent
totally spot on,
potentially on a different continent telling me how to be a parent, I'm skeptical of their claims of expertise. I'm sure there's often wisdom to be gleaned, but
if you think you're an expert at being a parent, just be one.
Yeah.
For a little while. Ooh, I'm not very good at this.
But I agree. I think one thing we've always tried to do is like you said, we kind of framed it in the sense of catechesis, in the sense that if you don't catechize your children, someone else will. And like you said, they're an hour at kids' church on a Sunday is not necessarily going to be enough to counter even not what they're hearing, just what they're absorbing culturally. There's messages in the things they watch on TV and the movies they watch, which are often innocuous, but they're always communicating a message.
Let me. Can I share a good example? So I talk about the clicker in the book. I believe in the chapter on culture and the remote control, and so all of their lives, I still do it to this day, even though my wife's the only one I get to lecture. and I stop and question. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand too is you can question affirmatively, but it's also what they leave out. So I can't tell you how many shows and movies we watch, and God just doesn't exist. So it's not that they're saying anything against God. It's just that he's irrelevant. And whether they're dealing with death or, anything, it's the secularism is so not in your face. And that's why it's so effective to shape worldview.
Yeah, well, it's presumed, we like Charles Taylor talks about how we live in a disenchanted world. Like, since the Enlightenment, we can't, before then, not believing in God or that the universe, there was theistic in some sense, wasn't possible. Whereas now it seems untenable to even conceive of the world being theistic, in any.
What's interesting is that in the book I talk about a study that Christian Smith did, a sociologist from, I think he was from Notre Dame. And this was back in the early 2004 or 5. But he found that in this longitudinal study over time, that the main faith of young people, and really most Americans, is probably most Westerners, let's say, is moralistic therapeutic deism.
Oh, yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. So in this, it's moralistic. It's about being a good person. That's what religion is. Therapeutic, it's what is good for me, makes me happy. And deism, God is, there's like 3 really convinced philosophical atheists in the world. Most, I exaggerate, but most people, it's just too obvious. This is not a matter of chance. There's a God, but like N.T. Wright in his Gifford lectures in 2018, which I listened to not too long ago, is most people are Epicureans, or however you pronounce it, Epicureans. Yeah, sure, God's there, but he has no relevance to my life. And that's what you get from the culture. So the atheist haters, in the olden days, the new atheists, the 10, 12, Dawkins and those guys, they're just passé.
I miss them.
You had a lot of fondness for
I find that, like, I miss where it was even relevant to discuss, whereas now it's just not. No one really cares. It's really hard. At least if you saw someone reading it, or it was in the public consciousness that actually debating God was actually worthy of your time.
That's a good point.
Whereas now it's not. One thing I will say, the stopping the TV, I'd never get away with doing that. I'd wait. I'd have to wait till afterwards. But it's stuff that's interesting. So like, even if you look at really popular movies, so like Frozen, obviously with sort of younger children, but you have is it Elsa who's the main character? She's saying she's like, Have I got a feedback? I can hear myself.
Yeah, it is.
Can
feedback,
you-
yeah.
Yeah. I'll let you.
Is that better? Talk.
Yeah,
And I'll
it's you, Phil. You causing the.
Phil.
But almost promoting nihilism in what she's saying when she says, she says, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. I mean, that's, and I was listening. I was like, I had to rewind it. I was like, what did she just say? And I mean that's absolutely moral nihilism. Being sung as truth to children. And I'm not like, oh gosh, well, they're all going to become nihilists now. But those kinds of things, they're certainly not innocuous. I'm not saying they're actively harmful, but they certainly, along with other messages that are absorbing, I think are not without, concern. I'd rather they not say stuff like that, because it's clearly not true.
But that, to me, that gives me the opportunity to tell my kids why it's not true.
Yes, yeah, and that's the good aspect, isn't it? It's a springboard then.
Well, that's why a lot of Christians for years, I mean, going back to early 20th century, of complaining about the culture, and it's dangerous, it's a threat, and so on. And I call it in the book our children's best friend, because everything can be used to affirm the faith that we embrace. Everything. It's just not even it's literally everything. And it's a wonderful exercise when you begin to look at reality from that perspective, as opposed to just letting, I call it the cultural messaging, as if there's a big marketing department. and it's communicating constantly, everywhere, all the time. And if you don't teach them, if you yourself, that's why I told you, Phil, the name is How to Build an Enduring Faith in You and Your Children. I first called it Your Children, but I realized, what you said earlier, if it isn't in me, how am I going to convey it to my children, right?
Absolutely.
So anyway,
I think that's been one of the enduring images, memories I have of. I don't think I've ever fully reflected on, but it kind of came out of what you said of my parents. Was listening to Linkin Park in front of them. And that was about as rebellious a music I got to. But the the lyrics, I just remember that there's a song that just has like a series of shut ups in it. I won't try and sing it, but it wasn't that they were like, you can't listen to it. They didn't just go, that's rude, obnoxious, turn it off. But it was why are you listening to it? Like, what is it about that music that you like? And I was just like, well, it sounds good, and I quite like it. But they're like, well, what are the lyrics telling you? And so we just had a bit of a conversation, and there's not too much to the lyrics other than it's kind of angry and wants the person to stop talking quite a lot. but the idea there of critiquing lyrics, I now annoy my wife somewhat when the radio's on. Like, I can't listen to this. This is just, the lyrics are terrible. So I haven't even heard the lyrics. They're just sort of background noise to many people.
Right.
But there is
they get through.
You still find yourself singing them. And when you really think through what those lyrics are really saying, there's a massive challenge to any perspective, I think. Or what it's saying, what it's saying about women, what it's saying about money, what it's saying about power, what it's saying about the police, depending on who you're into. And that's going to influence you to some degree, whether you want it to or not, if you're singing it, or if you're allowing it to just sort of flood in uncritically.
Right. Exactly. And it's parental malfeasance if we do not raise our kids to interrogate culture. It really is. I mean, it's so easy, really, but it takes I guess being intentional of you realizing that this is my job, And like you were saying earlier, I think I bring Elizabethan England, to not believe in God in that culture was inconceivable. And it wasn't that many years ago where it was not conceivable in Western, in the Western culture as well. But that's changed.
So I'm gonna ask some pushback now, which I like.
Super.
You never do that, Dan.
No. So
This is new.
I think I'm not sure I agree with it's malfeasant to not critique culture. That, because I can imagine, I can think of parents Christians who don't do that themselves, but are still amazing Christian parents.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I'm given to hyperbole and overstatement, just to let you know.
Oh, that's
no, I seriously am.
No, that's right.
I am.
I take things very literally, so I'm not very good at this.
No, but that's good. I need to. I'm writing another book, and was almost through with it, and then I had some feedback from another author guy, and it's just obnoxious how many times I make absolutistic statements. It's like, over and over, and I couldn't see it while I was writing it. So thank God he got it before we get it published, because it's gonna make it way better. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's because you always read with nuance, because you read what you say with the assumed nuance that you have, but your reader doesn't read it with that nuance. So,
but go ahead, keep your thought going. I love.
Well, no, I'm saying I can imagine, like I said, there are things that are certainly valuable and perhaps may improve parenting in terms of equipping your children to both retain the faith, to be able to promote it themselves and be able to engage critically and with culture and things like that. So I can certainly see those things as having value, but I think you can be a very good Christian parent without doing those things still. And I think there are things that are much more important in terms of your priorities of parenting.
Like what?
Well, well, there's basics, isn't there? I mean, it's funny when you talk about writing a parenting book. I know you haven't written a parenting book.
Yeah,
but on and off, I've been every couple of weeks I do a few notes on something I've been working on. It's kind of I call it love them, feed them, read to them. Because I think there are three core things about parenting: is love your kids unconditionally, love them, let them know it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to disagree. You'll love them irrespective, whatever they do. You will always love them, and it's nothing upsets me more when I read these horrible things where Christian parents, where one of the child has got pregnant, or they've whatever something, and they kick them out because they disagree. And I just think that's literally the opposite of what you should be doing as a Christian who is a parent. I mean, so those kinds of things. Love them, feed them, give them the basic thing, make sure they've got everything they need. It's a basic, providing you're able to do that well. And read to them. I think reading, and within that, I would certainly expand much more. But I think reading to your children, essentially all the research suggests if you don't read to your children before the age of 3, you're very much limiting their how they're flourishing, their future flourishing. If you don't read to your children, and within that, I'd obviously spiritual nourishment, reading the Bible, those kinds of things. But I think there are attending church, the role that dads have as well. I'm sure you've looked into that. I know women may not like this, but and mothers as well, unfortunately. But you look at the data for children who retain their faith, and one of the main indicators is: does the father, does the dad attend church? Does the dad have an active faith? That's one of the main predictors of their children retaining their faith. So that's just their merely being there. It doesn't mean they're critiquing culture, teaching them apologetics. Their mere presence, praying, reading the Bible, loving them, those kinds of things.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I grew up a Catholic and learned this my parents don't get any credit for this, so to speak. You know, so right. I mean, but you know, there is something about educating Christian parents that these things are going to have an influence.
Absolutely.
You know, and everyone knows that, but how, you know, and there's certain ways to deal with that. You know, don't listen to that music, and you can't watch that, and you know, and so hopefully I could teach my kids to be nuanced in how they're interpreting culture and interacting with. And it's just like my son he's down at FIU, Florida International University, and he calls me and he tells me, you know, the professor says this. It's such, you know, he's laughing at it and critiquing it, or he sees good stuff, you know, and he always sees the bigger picture, you know, and it isn't just so. But yeah, that's why there's no one way anything, you know, and that's why this is not that book.
What in terms of like questions, I always find that children have the most amazing questions, like really good ones. So I remember my son was 3. He just said that he was like, "Where is God? Like, if God isn't God's invisible, where is he? You know, or it just comes out of really good thing. Like yesterday, a couple of days ago, he asked me. He said, "Where is Jesus? If Jesus is God, Jesus is God, yeah, Dad. Yes, yeah, he's God. Where is he? Where's he right now?"
Good question.
He's saying, well, if he's God and he's a human being, and I can, you know, where is it? I always find they have great questions, and that's something I think you would agree with, is, you know, encouraging children to ask questions, especially about those kind of things, and trying to give them good answers as well. And sometimes I have to think, I'm like, and it's the thing that's most challenging is obviously it's not necessarily answering the question, but it's answering the question in a way that they will actually understand and get some value from, because you know, that's very difficult.
3-year-old mind, right?
Yeah, it's really difficult because trying to package it in a very simple way. I often ask, I try and ask more questions, so that I say, well, you know, when you say, "Oh, God's invisible," okay, I was like, well, can you think of? I said, can you think of anything that exists that's invisible? And I sort of prompted them. So we started talking about, well, the fact that everything is made out of things that matter that we can't necessarily see. I mean, we talk about atoms and things like that. And I said, yeah, they are a physical substance, yet we can't see them. I said, and then I used things about the wind. I said, well, we can't see the wind, but it affects, you know, it affects everything all around us. Exactly. So I tried to encourage them. Like, oh, okay. So then they started seeing, well, okay, there are things that we accept that exist that we can't necessarily see. And
that brings up a great point, because one of the chapters, the first chapter I was going to write was because this gal's story mentioned nothing about truth. She didn't say, "I don't believe it's true anymore, and therefore I'm going to go over here." She just and that hits on plausibility, which I'd love to talk about, and epistemology, and you know, because I believe most people leave the faith not because they're talked out of it, or they look at the evidence and they study and they say, well, you know, it just doesn't appear true to me anymore because I've looked at all this evidence. The resurrection, So, but I believe it's because Christianity no longer seems real and this other worldview does. So, and they believe, because this is part of the whole lie of secularism, is that I want to write a book called "There's No Such Thing as Unbelief," because we always refer to Christians as believers and non-Christians as unbelievers. Well, everyone believes, everyone lives by faith, right? And so you're going from one faith to another. So I've said, you know, if my son went off to college and came back and said he didn't believe in God anymore, or was an agnostic, I would say, okay, prove it, justify this to me. Why do you believe that? What is the evidence? Let's logic through this. So I'd force him to justify his belief, because it's another belief, another worldview. And so when it comes to truth, the idea of, I don't know if we hear this as much nowadays, but when I was in college, you know, the true for you, I'm glad that's true for you, but it's not true for me. You know, it's like,
bit.
What if I was always thought, well, how can something be true for you and not true? Didn't make any sense. But people buy that, and that's part of the whole culture thing, is it, through education. And just like I thought I was a chance happening when I thought, I might not exist, because evolution and Darwinian, even though it might not be taught specifically that you're a product of chance. My son just brought home a book on, because he's a musician, and on vocalism. And the first sentence is, according to Darwinian science, the voice is a product of chance. Now, it doesn't normally always say it that blatantly, but can you, because I was thinking of when you were talking, Dan, about can you see God? See, most Westerners are programmed or indoctrinated to see knowledge as, it's only empirical knowledge that counts. You can't know it if you can't see it. And a simple question that you ask your son is like, there's a lot of stuff you can't see, you can't test, and so on and so forth. So
one thing I'd be interested is, so let's say most parents I know, because most Christians I know don't have no interest in apologetics or necessarily thinking too deep. There's a level in which they're just not interested in going. It's I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but it's functional, communal. It's accepted. We don't need. There are questions that just don't necessarily are not interested in exploring, which is is fine. Don't have to. I prefer it if more people did. Yep. But so how would you persuade a parent who themselves doesn't do those things to then see the value in doing this for their own child? Because that's the thing I would struggle with, because I can't even get, as I say, Christians who are not parents. But for me, the case is much stronger for you as a parent, given that we are responsible for discipling our own children.
Right.
That we're responsible for teaching and leading and guiding them to, So I'd be interested in how you might go about doing it, or if you had experience sort of, with parents.
I don't know. I mean, what you said is so true. Is that certain people have inclinations for this, and others don't. Others are just more, I'm just by nature more intellectually curious than others. And I remember Tim Keller saying once in a talk, he said, I just have a great memory. I could pick any book off the shelf from whenever, and I know exactly where. And it helps when you're writing books, to do that kind of lecture. And so, like, I didn't create my own memory, So some people just have that, and I don't know, because I have some relatives who they're Christians and they have now adult children, and they're all Christians, but I don't really think they intentionally catechize them, and we have discussions as a family about that and so on, and it's like, well, they did this because their parents haven't taught them that's whatever XYZ, and that's just me being critical, but so I don't know. I think I blame's the wrong word. I believe that pastors should preach differently in our secular age. And that's where Keller, to me, is just a great example, because, on the web, I haven't been there in a while, but it used to say skeptics welcome. And he always knew he was preaching, because he was in New York City, preaching to non-Christians as well as Christians. So you have to justify that what we're talking about here is true, So he's constantly, in the sense of apologetics preaching. And if that was done more from the pulpit, I believe more parents sitting in the pews, more lay people would say, that's important. So it's really a leadership problem. It's like I'm telling you about my relatives, it's kind of awkward for me to go in there. It's just not my place, and I love them, and the kids are fine, and they're still following Jesus. But it's
really interesting. I think because you do raise an interesting point that culture is an important part, and critiquing it is vital as a parent, and teaching your kids to do that well. But I found there's more people digging into these things and searching for answers. Like when their kid asks a question, a lot of people just go into Google and that looks about right. Here you go.
Right.
So I think people are looking for these answers and questions. I think, but there's a gap, and I think it's where people like Keller do fill that gap well.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go online and you look at apologetics, and it's like kind of what our last video was about: philosophical arguments for God. Here's the kalam, here's the moral argument, here's some quite technical philosophical language, and for people who
Yeah,
aren't,
there's not going to be a
that's
lot
like,
of folks into that, right?
I don't get that. So
Well,
trying
yeah,
to find a middle ground.
I think I
there's not
have
loads
one.
there.
I think
Yeah.
I have one because, well, that might be presumptuous. So it's so simple. I think the tip of the spear of Satan's battle against God and his people is creation. Before I read the Bible through, I don't know, this is like 2010, and I hadn't read it through in a year, so I read it through, and it was struck me how how often God as creator is like an important thing in redemptive history. It's like, duh. But it starts at in the beginning God created, right? And there's this constant battle with idols who are literally nothing. And it's constant. I mean, one of my favorite, I always say that, but what wonderful passages in Jonah when he's in the belly, he's not in the belly of the whale or fish. He's in the bottom of the boat, and he's ticked off. And he's like, and they ask, who are you? And he's like, I worship the God of Israel, who's the creator of the sea and the land, you know. But I thought even there, that's the thing, you know. So what happened, I love the history of philosophy and ideas, and when you look at the Enlightenment, the devil did such a great job of, you know, building a worldview where God was no longer necessary. And I mean, it's really powerful stuff. But you know, basically, when you have Sir Isaac Newton, his physics led to a worldview that was mechanistic, and then you go from there to Kant and Hegel and so on, and you get Marx and Darwin and Freud, Nietzsche, and all of these just in the whole of Western culture went from God is an unproblematic, absolute thing about reality to it probably not, you know. And the idea is, what was my point? See, I knew I was going to do that. It was a good one.
That was good.
It was really
apologetics
good.
Apologetics and
Yes.
highbrow arguments.
Right. Okay. So I knew where I was going. Thank you. So, so to me, the idea of God as creator is the thing. Because you understand, if he is the creator, then everything else is like pales in comparison. So how do you teach that to your kids? Just keep saying God's the creator? So I use something in the book from, it's basically a design argument. So I would say to them, you see that pot? There are very intelligent people who believe that pot is made, designed, and put together by human, but the plant is a product of chance. Does that seem kind of weird to you? You know, so that's to me programming them, right? And or I take an orange. I have one of my favorite phrases when they were younger. Now that they're adults, it's less so, but praise chance. And I said, look at this. I think I go through this in the book. Look at this thing, this orange, right? It grew out of the ground, dirt. How does that happen? And then not only that, but when you look at it, it's beautiful and it smells. You have senses that you can smell and it smells wonderful. And not only that, when you eat it, it actually nourishes your body because you need vitamin C. And you know, after I'm going through this, and I just say, praise chance, you know, because that's it. It's either God is the creator of all things, or it's chance. You really don't have much in between.
Interesting luck. Yeah.
Yeah, and that works all the time. We were at the Mount Rushmore in South Dakota here in America, 2007, I think it was, or 6. And we're sitting there in the evening, and you have the 4 presidents up there. And I said, you know, and I always get eye rolls when I do this, but I keep doing it. even today. I said, can you imagine after millions of years, there are these faces of 4 people on a mountain. Just happen, wind and weather and all that. And then, what's even more remarkable is they look like specific people and they look like ex-presidents of the United States. And I would just go, isn't the chance grand, And they're like, ah. So you see what I'm saying? So that inference, as you begin to build that, or my son, I used to play golf. Thank God he rescued me from that. But we'll be outside hitting balls and look at the beautiful sunset, and I'll just go, praise chance, and that just became a thing with the family. It's like, it's impossible. So how are they going to then go to university, right, and listen to some Darwinian guy talk about, it's like, well, what did evolution did this and evolution did that? How can evolution do anything, So anyway, it's really quite simple. So to me, you don't have to be into the kalam, and I don't even know what I know what it is, but to actually say it, I always get hung up, cause and this and that. So that's just one example of how you could put that. Anybody, you could be not even graduate from high school. That's pretty simple. This was created. That tree was not.
Have you found? Go on, Dan.
No, I was going to say, I think that's why I like a lot of the different like catechisms and stuff, like where it talks about, just very simple things like God created everything and everyone. Those kinds of, I think getting children to understand that message. Everything you see and everything you can't see is made by God.
And what's interesting is that you have to be educated out of that. In other words, I think naturally children, of course, know God, and
That's cool. Yeah.
Right. We're made in His image. We can't escape it. So, but you truly have to be educated to such a degree that you could actually believe that the whole universe and everything in it, the human cell, I can go on and on, is a product of chance, random mutation.
I think it's really interesting. Maybe a slight nuance on that. I think there's an element of what that can sound like is a real fight with evolution, to the extent that you have to unpick the groundings of a lot of modern science, where I know many Christians who are into evolutionary science, to the extent that its explanatory power of how things are working is actually quite evident to them. But what they wouldn't disagree with is that God is creator, and actually that explains why we see design in things, not chance. And so I think where some parents and some of my more young earth friends seem to get caught on is a battle against evolution, where there might not need to be as much of an evolution. Like I think you said it in the sense of what evolution can't do anything. In a sense, evolution isn't a thing. It's not an agent. It's not a it's not the creator. And I was talking to my wife earlier. She was saying something about she'd been part of a seminar where the explanation was, back when we were hunters and gatherers, this is why we do it. And I'm going, well, how do they know that? Like, where's that sounds like there might be true, but it also sounds like a bit of a narrative. And are we allowed to wrestle with that? And so
the materialists will say that we use the God of the gaps argument, and they use that in evolution all the time. And I totally agree with you. I'm not going to debate the mechanisms of how God created the world. I mean, it's just not, it's beyond our understanding anyway. Right? I mean, if you could understand it, then you would be God, which is kind of what people want, sinful heart wants to be, right? We'll figure out everything. But yeah, you can get off on the tangents. It's irrelevant. I don't know how God did it. I mean, He could have created a universe that looks old. I don't know. I just don't think it's important.
The design thing's interesting as well, because even when you look at evolutionary biologists, they'll talk about the appearance of design. So it's it's not like there's discussion about design.
Dawkins says it himself. Certainly all looks, but we know it's not.
Apparent design, apparent, guidance in that process. So,
and it also depends how you define evolution. So I've heard Christians, and it's a little sloppy sometimes, but if we define evolution as random mutation driven by natural selection, then random is a problematic word, because if God is, nothing's random. So is it the appearance of randomity? Or, if God did use, evolutionary processes, I mean, clearly microevolution exists. But
yeah, I think it's.
Have you heard?
Oh, go on, you go.
I was going to say, have you sort of not changing James Tour? He's a scientist. Have you heard of him?
Is he the one? Yeah, I have heard of him.
Yeah, by abiogenesis of where did life come from, and he started his own podcast, and it's a brilliant guy, and he's great. He starts everyone, I love Jesus, and believe that, something like that, and it's the physical bodily resurrection of the dead. And he always asks the people on the show, why do you believe Jesus rose physically bodily from the grave? And but that's beside the point. But he says, we could debate evolution and all that, but where did life come from? And no one knows. I mean, it's not even, it's like, well, we don't really want to talk about that, because that's there's nothing. And this guy's a biochemist. I mean, he's a genius. But so to me, that's the more important issue. Where did life come from? And we know.
Yeah.
Because non-life cannot create life.
Yeah, and I think it's putting that emphasis on creator, I think, is important, and finding those battles. And I think this is something that I'm quite passionate about in the work that I do, in engaging students who are coming from different countries where they've never once come into contact with the gospel, and what they know of Christians is they're slightly odd, if they know anything at all, and there's this element of anti-science somewhere in there. And so unpicking the things that are not the foundation points, not the sort of closed hand issues, from these sort of open things. So we don't need to battle with evolution, because we have a creator and a designer that's very clear from scripture. We can go into days, age later. Let's look at creator, and look at what it says to be human, and look at its relevance to life, and the overall story of what it's saying in God has interacted with humanity. It is a personal God, yet a transcendent God, that contradicts much of other religions. What do you make of that? And continuing to ask questions of what do you read as important out of this passage, and let's interact with what you've brought to the text as well as your culture, and let me show you why that's not necessary. That might be so, that might not be so. But the scriptures are silent on evolution, but they aren't silent on creator of everything. I think that age is potentially a debate. I think there's an open-handed question on age, and I don't know, there's Christians that would probably fight me on that. But the openness to allow them to engage with the scriptures with whatever scientific framework they've grown up in, without having to unpick everything that they know, and dump on it as well, and be so attacking on that. Right. We focus on the main things, and allow that then to challenge any frameworks that might be poorly conceived. And so I think that kind of thing I'd probably bring into the sort of parenting question of continually asking questions of why you think that, or where that's come from, is quite powerful in terms of how it's powerful in how we evangelize. I think that's also quite powerful in how we disciple, and there's that sort of overlap with the two anyway.
One of my books I'm going to share with you guys is exactly about that point. Questions.
I don't know where I was going with that or a question, so Dan, go for it.
No, I was going to say, just briefly, before I asked a question again, I was just going to say, it's almost a little bit old in the sense that those sorts of discussions a little bit now. I think most people, young people and children especially, are much more interested now in, identity, meaning, and purpose. What does Christianity say? How does it compete with the alternative worldviews about meaning, about purpose for my life, and who I am? And I think they seem to be the most sort of.
Yeah, and Keller's so great on that.
Have you read his most recent book, Mike?
No.
Making Sense of God. Oh well, it's not that.
Yes.
I thought it was great. It's really frustrating because that was Reason for God it is a good book, but it is very much
It's aged.
It's dated. It's actually dated really quickly. It's quite scary. I think that came up in 2009, I think. Yeah,
was it 7? Might have been
2008. Yeah, probably 2008, 2009. That's seriously dated. Making Sense of God is just such a good book for today. It's such a good book. It doesn't seem to be that popular. I find it.
Yeah. What's interesting is that the paradigm has shifted. So I am. For this other book I want to read, this guy is incredible. His name's George Marsden. He's a historian, and he wrote A Fundamentalism in American Culture, which was tremendous. And this book is called The Soul of the American University, From Protestant Establishment to Established Non-Belief. And so where he is now is the 19th century, the mid to late 19th century. And the reason I bring this up is because there's a gentleman here, his last name was White, I forget his name. He wrote a book about the war of science and religion. And that model didn't really exist prior to that because all scientists were Christians. The Christian worldview gave rise to science, right? And so you saying that right now really kind of sort of convinces me that war of science against religion is pretty much almost but over. People are sort of getting we're not arguing about evolution anymore or whatever, right? I mean, some people are, but it's really about those issues that you were talking about, Dan, that's what's important to people now. Because I really believe God's so obvious. Well, every verse in the Bible seems to be my favorite verse. Romans 1:20. God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. And every morning I see Him when I pray. It seems every time I pray, I just thank God for revealing Himself in creation, in Scripture, and in Christ. Because we would be, you look at the history of philosophy, it's trying to figure it out. I love, one of my favorite metaphor analogies, whatever it is, simile, is puzzles and puzzle pieces. So the history of philosophy is just people studying puzzle pieces, trying to figure out what the heck it all means. And there's no big picture, so they can't, it's just like, this isn't fitting. In the book, I say that, for most of them, life is a Woody Allen movie, because it's just, there's no there. Just trying to get the things you're talking about, Dan, fulfillment and significance and hope and meaning. And then at the end of every Woody Allen movie, it's just resignation, because it doesn't exist in his universe. How do you get hope and purpose and meaning from chance? I mean, where does that really? That's why the Christian worldview, to me, to young people especially, is so powerful and persuasive. And because those exact things you said they're looking for, it's the only place.
It's hard as well. It's interesting. I mean, what role do you think? Because I think children. I know psychologists will talk about, as children start approaching those sort of teenage years, the views and values of their parents become much less important than their peers, their friends, people around, far more often than you. And that I think that I've got friends in Florida. I know you said you're from Florida. I've got friends, Port St. Lucie, and we've been there a few times. And I found it really interesting about how Christian the culture was, like explicitly Christian. I put the radio on, be Christian radio, churches everywhere.
Mhm.
It was much more infused in the culture. Whereas I'm not sure if you've ever been to England, but that's very not very not much the case here. And so my daughter's my daughter or my son's friends are much more likely to unlikely to be Christians, or to most are going to be brought up by parents secular, and themselves might not be explicitly anti-Christian, but certainly may not know much about it, or just simply assume that it's kind of nonsense. Really, that's how we're catechized in England. Is you sort of assume it's irrelevant and you're apathetic, or you actively dislike it. Is they're the main options on the table. What role do you think did your kids more friends that were Christians? What role do you think that plays, and how would you recommend sort of parents, I guess, the role of apologetics and things in that?
Well, it's interesting because the sociology of children, and as they get older and what they end up believing, it's overwhelming that parents have the biggest influence. So I think the tendency is to think that because, and this, maybe this was before Trump, who took the oxygen out of everything, but there was a lot more talk about young Christians leaving the faith in 2015 when I started writing at 16, 17, and it's just not as much out there anymore. But parents have the biggest influence. I mean, the Bible says that clearly, and you hope your kids pick the right friends and so on. But I always have used my children's friends, when they were growing up, as a means to engage them in conversation about them, the friends. What do they believe? Do they go to church? Not to say you shouldn't hang with them, but let's analyze them. Let's see what their worldview is all about. And it's interesting because, again, you're teaching your children to not accept. I talked about the messaging of culture, but anything, their friends, what their friends do, and getting them to engage and to think about it, because who you hang is going to become maybe who you are, or who you become. And so it's almost like apologetics is just the undercurrent of everything I think I did, because I would never sat down and said, let's study this. If you really want to know this, I mean, I'm obnoxious to my kids about telling them they need to read more. Buying them books every Christmas, and you read it yet? You read it yet? And but so I don't know if that answers your question, but again, I think there's this engagement that you teach your children to think critically about everything they do in life. Not just accept.
No, I agree. I think like you said, we do. I always err to pessimism. So whereas it's good to be reminded, that we do have a big influence on what our children go on to believe. I think you're right in terms. I think we were getting at sort of like mirroring that behaviour. I think anything valuable that you want to communicate to your children, you have to mirror to them. You have to be living it, yourself. For them to reflect it themselves.
That's a great point to bring up, because you're taught, or within the Christian whatever, to be a good example for your kids. In a lot of ways, I'm a terrible example. I mean, I'm just so human and flawed, and I say somewhere in the book that I think that gives my kids hope, because at the center of our religion is a cross, right? That God died for us because we're imperfect. So to have to be an example, and usually it comes down to Christianity becoming moralism, because Christianity is about being a nice person and, being a good person and being morally upright. And, I have nothing against being morally upright.
It's a good thing to do.
I'm all for
we keep failing.
moral uprightness.
No, I think what you said is, I think that's really important. I think it's really important for children to know that you're fundamentally flawed.
Oh,
because what children don't like, they're the best. They hate hypocrisy. And whenever I do it, I'll say something and then or I'll do something and then or my son will do something and he'll see me doing it. He said, "Dad, you said we couldn't do that." You're right. You're right, son.
Well, I pull rank and I'm a dad. I can do whatever the heck I want.
Yeah. See, that's the worst thing. I was taught in practice. Oh yeah, just do what I say, not what I do. That's terrible. So that's terrible. So I admit, I apologize. You're right, son. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry I did that.
Or one of the most powerful things as your kids are growing up and getting older is when you just, you're a jerk. I'm speaking of me, not you guys, of course.
No, I have
could be true. We'll take
and then just to say, I'm really sorry, I was wrong. I suck. Embrace the suck. Sort of vulgar, sorry, but embrace that you're not perfect. I have, and Keller said that once in some. I love the way he put it. Is we as Christians should be the least pretentious pretenders of any people on earth, because we know we are rotten to the core. I just know that. There's not. You can call me out on anything, and I'll say, by golly, you're right. Probably, maybe not, but I think, yeah.
I think the problem is a lot of Christians still think they're good. That's the problem. that enables the hypocrisy, and that's why.
Well, that's when Christianity gets confused with moralism, and a lot of churches preach. We went to a church for a number of years in another state, and it just was so often like, you're almost like the goal of Christianity is to do X, Y, and Z, and to be this, and this. And again, those aren't unimportant, but what Christianity is, you as a sinner being reconciled to holy God. Everything else is gravy, right? So everything flows. Like the last time I'm been writing through the Bible for a while on this, whatever, and reading through the letters of the New Testament, I'm just struck by the ethic of love that is just permeates everything about it. So we're compelled to love, and if we know what the cross is about and the gospel is about, loving is a lot, even though it's hard, is easier. Because it's not all about you anymore. And that kind of stuff really communicates to your kids too, that your imperfections, because just be you, and God will use that.
The humility aspect of everything we should be doing. I think the speed at which defensiveness comes in to the Christian life, and how we navigate that in as parents, I think, but also as teachers, preachers. If we are quick to be defensive about who we are and what we do, we lose the fruit of the spirit aspect. We immediately are no longer gentle. We're no longer kind. We're no longer.
Well, defensiveness is the opposite of what we should be. Right?
Yeah, and it's that what you said. You should be able to come to me and say, "Look, you've done this wrong," and my first instinct should be probably, probably have. Okay, let's look at it. Let's take responsibility for. Okay, well, the bit that I have done wrong may not be as huge as what you think it might be, but even so,
we could talk about that, right?
First and foremost, sin permeates everything we do, and we got to acknowledge that. And so
it's like people said, so I grew up, it's sort of, this was in early Christianity, sort of fundamentalistic or whatever. And, you always should check your motives. I mean, really? I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a pure motive in my entire life. Not one. I mean, I just
still trying to find that moment.
Well, I found out when I wrote this book and then writing that I envy is a sin, because I look at all the famous apologists out there, and and I'm just this guy sitting in a room trying to get somebody on a podcast to talk to me.
You've made it.
Not exactly critical witness, baby. And I'm jealous, I mean, I literally am, and I don't like him because he's famous. Whatever, that's just the human heart. Calvin called it an idol factory, it's just, and being a Calvinist, loud and proud, evil is just all permeating in our being, and the beauty of the Christian faith. And I just told this to my niece the other day. They were having some issues or whatever, and I said, too often we think sanctification is our job, that we have to love, that we have to do this, and we have to this. And, we have to do those things, but the transformation of your heart to enable you to do them in love is God's business. There's no pressure, and that's, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. It's his job to do the purifying, right? It's just, I'm good now, right? So I love that, because and when you teach your kids that Christianity, it takes all the pressure off. It's no longer religion. It's literally a relationship with a holy God who loved you in spite of you. You were his enemy. He died for you. It's just, that's what makes Christianity so powerful, and all the things that Dan was saying about what people are really looking for today.
Yeah.
That's where we can go in confidence, and I don't know, not have to get in debates about how old the earth is or whatever,
We need kids need answers to those questions. You don't want to dodge them, but I think there's such a powerful lesson. I think so. Chris commented on our live chat: acknowledgement of wrongdoing supports healing and teaching of others. There is a lot to be said for how we operate, how we live, how we act. And I said it right at the beginning, and I think kind of repeating that is important, that you can speak truth, teach truth, but if you don't live it, it's dead. And I mean, that's James, isn't it?
Right.
That works, it's dead.
Well, one of my favorite, I said, I'm not going to say that again.
You keep saying it. That other favorite verse that
you're on your 4,893rd favorite verse, dude. We gotta call it right. But one that's been very meaningful to me is 1 Corinthians 8:2. Paul says, "The man who knows something does not yet know as he ought to know," and that isn't a call for skepticism, but it's a call for what I call epistemological humility. Meaning I can only know so much. And so I never think, it's almost, Paul is like Socratic in that way. It's just always asking questions, and Socrates, I don't know anything, right? And, but the beauty of that is, I don't know what I don't know. I know more than I don't know than I do. And I'm very comfortable with my ignorance, So when your kids come to you, ask you something, you're like, I don't know. I have no idea. We'll find an answer, of course, or whatever, if there is one. But to not know, see, then in the living, so there's some probably, maybe people who are more intellectually minded apologists who make their knowing an idol. They just, you become so like, I need or want to know this, and again, those aren't bad things, but it's sort of irrelevant, because everything is love. And I love, when I learned about Reformed theology, I was 24, and the guy told me a phrase I'd never heard. He says, love is efficacious. It's effective. It actually creates a result in the one loved. And specifically, he was talking about the cross and Jesus dying for me personally. And it love, even as we do it imperfectly, will have its effect. Person can't help but responding. It's so beautiful. That's why when you begin to take the onions off the Christian religion and the theology and the cross and the gospel and the Holy Spirit, it's just too heavy. It's just too heavy. And that's what you're
I'm just
teaching your
taking
kids,
note
and they
of that.
want it. It's when they want what you got.
Yeah. That is it. That's the power of the gospel, isn't it? We are affected, not affected by the gospel, because he first loved us, and I think that's that power that moves us. And I think that can be an element of our gospel that is downplayed or secondary. When we look at Ephesians 2, for example, you've got, he's the one that bulldozed the hostility between us and God, but it's also the reconciliation between us and others, and that new humanity aspect of love and humility and
New creation, right?
New creation. It's got to be how we live. But the moment you start putting duty on that and moralism on that, it gets
it ruins everything. It really does.
Everything.
Because the when Jesus could say, I mean, think about it. The whole of the Old Testament, all the prophets and the law and everything, is boiled down to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that, we have to love vertically in that relationship. Once that relationship is healed, then we can love ourselves. We can have a proper assessment of ourselves, and then we can love others, because you kind of get it after a while, especially as you get older, because one of Keller's favorite words is crush. This God's going to crush you, whatever. And that's, God will humble you. And it's so beautiful, because out of that crushing of showing you who you really are, and it's pretty ugly, you are then able to love others in their ugliness or whatever,
Oh.
And that is so attractive to kids, to growing up and seeing that realness. It's like, there's something different.
Like you said, that it gives them hope that we, and I think there's a element of Christianity definitely that emphasize the perfect speaker, the perfect sound, the perfect look, the best community. It's so easy to make an idol out of anything. We then showing our kids that actually there is something about the broken, the messy, the hurting, the lonely that becomes very beautiful through the eyes of the gospel.
And God can literally transform it. I mean, he makes that which was ugly, he makes it beautiful. And only he could do, I mean, only God can create the human cell. I mean, there's trillions of them in our body, and the complexity is insane. And everyone knows that now. Nobody knows that, it just happened. Darwin's time, it was a blob, it's like, oh, sure, those can kind of come together and create this. But so I always think, if he could create that, or that little being in my daughter's tummy, and when she came out 30 years ago in a month, the first thing I said was, there's a God. Through all the tears, you'd have to go, because how can you look at that and there not be a God? That makes no sense, And but in fact, there's one brief thing I say in the book about a kid who was going to church, and he just was tired of the hypocrisy and the judgmentalism, and I don't believe that's really common throughout the church, because the culture, Christians are what? Bigots and homophobes and narrow-minded and judgmental, right? That's our MO. And some people will say, well, I left the faith because Christians are that way, which is not intelligent. Is it true or not? But but it's there, and it can be subtle too. And then when it turns into that, Christianity becomes a burden, the opposite of hope. You were saying. Yeah. And when it doesn't, when it's real, it's the gospel. It's just it's a beautiful thing. And their friends just don't. I mean, if they're friends of my daughters, and just think of some of them who never were Christians or whatever, and just, not, you really don't want that, and they see that.
So in summary, we're basically saying is to be a good to be a good Christian parent is to model and embody the gospel and everything.
That's all.
That's all. It's a straightforward task, guys. Come on.
Well, so in the book, so I talk about truth and I talk about plausibility structures and why certain things seem real to people or not, and how the culture does that, and showing kids how sure it seems when you're looking at that magazine cover or hearing something that seems like it's like, for my son, Dominic is the musician. All his life growing up, I would say, if you like, let's say we bought him a guitar and I said, now your life has meaning. And he would say, shut up. Because I would do this. Oh, I still do it, over and over, because those things aren't going to give you fulfillment, but the plausibility of the culture says, yeah, if you just had that, right? One of you guys said earlier, if you just had that, and then you're going to be, so you're teaching them all through those kind of means what's real and what's not. And I think, because you used the word earlier, Phil, explanatory power, which is probably one of my favorite kind of apologetics tactic things or whatever. But what explains this, right? What best explains, what gives it the most power? And when you talk about the gospel and forgiveness and love, and how do you explain that? Does that come from atoms smashing together? If you're a pantheist, does it come from, the all being absorbed into the nothingness, a la John Lennon, or what best explains it? So there's just so many mechanisms to me. I think when I get emotional about my relationship with God, it's because I know in those moments he's real and he loved me. I won't get emotional now, but I'll try not to. But, and you make God real to your kids. Whether like Phil, Dan, it's, you don't have to be studying William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland at all. You don't, you just don't. But you can make God real to your kids. And that's through whatever. They know that, then they know the stuff out there is just not real. It's idols, right? It was Isaiah 44. Anyway, the Isaiah 40 is where he mocks the idols. He goes, cuts down a tree. He makes some fire he cooks his food on it. Then he carves this little, sets it there, and he worships it.
Yeah, what's this? Yeah.
And our idols aren't as crude, but they have the about same fulfillment power.
Mm-hmm. It's a block of wood.
Yeah, exactly.
What I'll be doing on my children's 10th birthday, they'll be getting William Lane Craig's and that's what
I want it done in a week.
For bedtime every night for a year. That's what we'll be reading to get through.
Oh.
This will give you purpose.
No more questions until you finish reading this.
So I hope even finish it for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, did I say that out loud? Sorry, that was heresy. I haven't finished the book by William Lane Craig.
Some stuff I read though, like JP, and even C.S. Lewis, I'll read and I'll read that paragraph again and again and again. I'm not getting this, I mean, they're just like, and it's somewhere up here. It's funny.
Well, they just didn't write clearly. No.
Their fault.
It's their fault. So blame them. I mean, humble, always. So it's been a real pleasure to sort of go around the circle of parenting with you, Mike. Was there anything? I'm just aware of time and general screen wariness, but I'd be interested. Is there anything from your book that we haven't particularly touched on that you think is probably a core thing that should be shared, that you'd like to get out there?
I'm so grateful you brought that up. That's why I printed out the thing here. Whatever. One of my chapters 7 is self-pity's greatest enemy. It's all about gratitude. And so all of my chapters are it's all about, and the reason is because it's silly, right? because it's all about truth. That's why it's like this girl didn't really believe it was the truth. And then I went and started writing about parenting. It's like it's all about parenting too, and it's all about or trust. And so the one that's all about gratitude. I remember JP telling me once, because he's sort of a relation anyway to the family, but he said, nobody gets mad at the tooth fairy. And I think that's kind of common maybe in apologetic circles, but I'd never heard it. And then it's true, and so I pounded this into my kids, to take personal responsibility. And well, it's interesting when you look at the command to be grateful in the Bible. It's all over the place. To be thankful. Paul says, in fact, he says, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And he doesn't really say that about many things. This is God's will for you to give thanks. And when you extend the understanding of what he's saying there, is that Romans 8:28 is another favorite one. Stuff happens in their life, and Paul says, we know that in all things God works together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And I always say, well, probably 98%. There's no way Paul meant all. Seriously. And it always gets a chuckle. It always, even to this day, I just like, because stuff still happens, right? And but it's all things work together for good, not that they are good, but they are good for you and his glory. And ultimately, our perspective is eternal. If it isn't, then it's, what are we doing, right? And so teaching them to give thanks and not to feel themselves the victim. Self-pity, poor me, this didn't happen. And that is the inclination of for every sinful heart. I'm a victim, and I want you to feel sorry for me. And so teaching them to be grateful and give thanks, and to, when we pray, whatever, I always say, God, give us a heart of gratitude. Let us be thankful. And then telling them, when a situation comes up. In fact, I had a niece and her husband, and they'd had some really struggles. And I asked them one day, this toughest 4 years of my life, blah, blah. And I said, have you ever thanked God for that? And he looked at me like, no, but it's hard to give thanks when it's pain, it's hard to give thanks. But to me, as I've grown older, because now I'm, it's so bizarre to say 61, but when you get older, I've realized that my biggest sin is lack of trust in God. I have plenty of the other stuff out there that's pretty apparent, but I really don't trust him, and by nature. And it's interesting. I have a blog post I'm going to eventually get to called The Trust Challenge. When something happens, your first inclination is to go, oh. Well, one of my favorite, I just did that on purpose. No, but it truly is. It truly is. Dude, you can't have that many favorite verses. Isaiah 26:3, you will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast because he trusts me. If you don't have perfect peace, you don't trust. And my daughter going through labor, I sent her a text on that verse, and I said, you can trust him.
Amen. That's...
But the point is that when you teach them that, they literally get to a point in their life where they can't feel sorry for them. I mean, it took me a lot of years. I was probably in my 50s before I couldn't feel sorry for myself. Literally. I mean, I did a lot when I was younger, like you kids.
I'll take it.
You children.
I got told I look like I'm 25, so I'll take that.
That's why I asked you if you were in your 30s, because I thought, well, But
I don't feel like I look like I'm 25.
You don't look 25.
No.
But that's one thing that we did talk about that I think is ginormous, because a lot of people leave the faith because they're angry at God. God just they're just angry, and you hear these deconversion stories, and you hear a lot of that in there.
Yeah, well, he's not the God I expected him to be. And if our churches have been inadvertently teaching therapeutic deism, and it's no longer therapeutic or moral because they've hurt me.
Yes.
Well, the deism's not going to hold you when things get really tough. And
that's a great point.
Why is it? Why should I say thank you to the watchmaker that abandoned his world? So it's just
and related to that is something that's also huge. One of my favorite verses. So Deuteronomy 32, 3 and 4. So whenever I get to the point where I don't understand, which is a lot, like thinking about hell, and it oppresses me. I want real hell for the baddies. His Stalin, Hitler, Mao, fine. But so I always come back, and of course, when there's tragedies and painful things happen in our lives, I go back to Deuteronomy 3, 2, 4, when Moses is going to die before he goes into the promised land. And he says, I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect. All his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. Okay. I'll trust you. Because so it's his character that's on the line, and I'm going to trust his character before I'm going to trust my lion eyes or my own understanding, right?
Yeah.
So on.
Yep. That's good.
And that's a great thing to teach your children. I mean, it's just, and I'm still teaching them that,
Yeah.
And then I have hopefully soon a granddaughter I could start lecturing.
Awesome. Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Dan, any sort of last questions or thoughts?
No, it's made me think. So it's been interesting talking about this topic and thinking about it before we started chatting. It's fascinating. I've been really enjoyed listening to your the kind of things you've done and your perspective and things. It's definitely given me food for thought.
Well, boy, I'm grateful.
Yeah,
God is good.
One of these interesting things of taking it into how we teach in general. My parenting experience is slightly different from most, but that's another story that people can find in our introduction video, our very first one. But just in terms of how we teach anyway, as preachers or teachers or just friends with kids, that just to remember that teaching is beyond. It's not just what we say, and oftentimes it's the times that we mess up that and how we respond to that mess up that teaches people better of what the gospel is.
I have a great message God's been getting through to me recently that I have a great friend whose son was a drug addict, my best friend, and we started a relationship, as he was, and I knew him as a kid, but as an adult, and then we started a relationship, and then over time he got clean, blah blah blah, and he ended up dying, OD, and it's like, I prayed and you said no, and fortunately he knew Jesus. So in John 11, 25, 26, he isn't dead, he's with Christ. And and then through other experiences with my kids and friends and relatives, I just realized, what I say has absolutely no power. Zero. Literally zero power in and of itself, right? And it just takes, so you can still be that person and teach them and lecture, whatever, but it isn't up to me. What I say just doesn't really matter. And that it's really an earned humility because it's the truth. Nothing happens unless God does it.
Yeah.
Period.
Is that attention though? It doesn't, but it does. So I find the Colossians 4 passage quite helpful in this. Is that pray that God will open the door, but I will speak clearly. I'll keep coming back to that passage. That God in his awesomeness and transcendence has chosen to partner with us in this
Amen.
teaching and working to bring about the gospel of good news and the humility in that is that, yes, he is the one that gives us opportunities. He's also the one that forgives us when we don't take those opportunities, but also in that we are called to put some work in and to do our utmost to follow him, and he continues to transform us as we continue to seek him. And there's so much in that. That's such a beautiful story and beautiful.
Being a Calvinist, the people will tend to say, basically, and I talk about it in the book because I have a chapter on theology and teaching our kids the big picture of redemptive history, how important that is, right? And then I do a section on Calvinism, and I tell in the beginning, I say, if you don't like Calvinism, don't read this. it's just gonna make you angry. And but you never. So most people, their caricature of Calvinism, and a lot of Calvinists live up to it, is that is determinism, right? It's just God determines and I've learned you never play God's sovereignty off of our responsibility. They both exist. We're accountable. We're free. We know that. And even though he's the one who works in me to will and work according to his good purpose, he's the one working, and I've got to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? So those two are just meshed, but see, God is the one who animates all growth and makes things happen. And you're, I say in the book, we're secondary causes. He's the primary cause of all things, and we're the secondary. He lets us, as long as we kind of understand, we're secondary.
Yeah.
I got that mixed up for a long time.
I think we've all got to go through there. Mike, it's been a pleasure chatting, and I'm sure we could carry this on for longer, but aware that time.
People are getting tired of me.
Well,
no,
it's life.
No, I've listened to a bunch of yours. I love that you guys are long form. I love it because the biggest so one of my pet peeves is there's only 5-minute videos or whatever things. It's like people, young people can't pay attention, and yet the biggest podcast on earth is a guy who interviews people for 3 hours.
Yes, it's mad. I don't know how he does it. He's
lots of whiskey. I think lots of whiskey.
Oh, he's gone on my heathen list. Yeah. He needs to find Jesus, boy.
Yeah.
The only time he brings up Jesus is when he uses his name in vain. So he needs Jesus.
Yeah. He's got some people on there that. Well, he's had Jordan Peterson on there. Maybe that's close. But anyway, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And your website is the persuasivechristianparent.com.
Yeah, so I'm writing a new book about the Bible, and so I'm rebranding. So you can get there from persuasivechristianparent.com or my name, MikeDiVirgilio.com. So either way, and so I'm going to repurpose that, and so trying to we'll be figuring that out in the next month or two. But
we'll I description for you.
Yes, thank you. And then I got these books ready because you always say you want
somebody to tell
yes.
You weren't gonna stiff me on that, were you?
No. You give us your free books. You give it to
we're out of practice. It's obviously been a little while.
I'm saying I'm going to be ready for them when they ask.
The most prepared we've had.
Yeah, go on. Give us the resources that.
Well, now I'm embarrassed because one of them was going to be this. I just didn't know it was out of date.
It's a good book. You should read it. It's just be aware.
Well, I don't know what you mean. I'd love to talk to you about that because it's been a while, since I read it. Really, about 2015 when I was, starting really to get into this. That was one of the first, and it was one of the things that was instrumental from me in it was he said that the other person, the burden of proof is just as much on them as you, right? They have to defend their view. So I call it the consideration of the alternative. If you don't believe in A, you got to believe in B or C or whatever. You don't just not believe in nothing. So that was, I really enjoyed and appreciate that. And then
for the podcast, that was the reason for God. That was a reference.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I was
only listen sometimes.
Right. I do too. Personally. I download them on my, oh my gosh. Here, check this out. Sorry. This is old school. And I am old. That's what I listen to my podcast on.
That's
Negative laugh. He mocks me. You mock me.
I like it. No, there's a few of them about still.
Yeah.
I know. I'm thank God because
That's
I'm so used to it, and
That's
I download everything. I take your YouTube videos, I put them on a MP3 converter, and then I pop them on here.
There you go.
Yeah. So
That's the way to do it.
yeah, and then another one that I think is huge, especially if someone's sort of new,
Mm.
is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist
Oh,
by
yeah.
Eisler and Turek.
Yeah.
And there's tons of stuff in here. I mean, you have to be pretty motivated to engage it, but it's really wonderful. Good basic stuff. And so I would encourage that. And I like the idea of faith because atheism is faith, whereas people don't tend to think that, they're scientific and they don't believe in God, so they don't need faith. That's why my book after next is going to be about that, God willing. And then the last one is Tactics by Kokel.
Yeah, Kugel. Yeah.
I love this book because it's so, like you said, you just ask questions. You don't really have to know a whole lot. And then people realize how little they know. And when I read this, I told my son, because I gave it to all of them, I said, it shows how weak the alternatives are. They just can't stand the scrutiny, and that's the kind of confidence you can give your kids, and they're just not going to go run after some other,
nice
thing. Anyway.
No,
So,
they're very, very good recommendations. I've read them, and they're all very good. And no disrespect to Tim Keller. As I know you've quoted Keller a lot. I'm a Keller.
How dare you, Dan?
Yeah.
Well, no, he was our premarital counselor at Westminster too.
Wow.
Yeah, that was before he was Tim Keller, I always say.
Nice.
No, but it's true. It's like you still remember the things he said. One of the great things is this is so Keller. He said the first thing we're sitting there and he goes, I don't even know if he said hi. He goes, the only sinner bigger than the one you're marrying is you. How rude.
Now, I need to remember that for when I do marriage prep.
That's a great intro.
That is amazing. Hi.
The only sinner worse, and it's like,
hi.
yeah. And then afterwards, and he said also, there's few things. Remember, don't always say always and everything, and then don't ask your spouse why they did something, because what's the only response they can give you? I'm a jerk. Right? I don't know. I'm a jerk. I use that all the time. 35 years. Been very effective.
Yeah, I'm not persuaded I'm going to try that, but I'm glad you're brave.
Come on, Dan.
Cool. We'll start closing down the channel. Mike, thank you. It's been a
gentlemen,
pleasure to chat.
I really appreciate it.
It's been good. We'll
pray for England.
Yeah,
we all need it.
Amen, brother.
Thanks to those who are watching on YouTube. Thanks for those who are watching on the podcast or downloading, putting you through MP3 converter and putting onto a very old iPod MP3 player. You're welcome to do that. And do feel free to comment or review this if you're on a podcast service. We would love to have more people engage with us, challenge us, ask us questions. If you've got people that we should talk to, do let us know, and we'd love to try and connect them. We've got some lined up over the next few weeks. We've got hopefully someone named Lisa Ajay next week, just confirming that, talking about racial justice and a collective that she started. And then also in a few weeks in Feb, we've got confirmation of talking about Christians and depression. So we're looking to engage in that topic as well and how we might do better. So do subscribe and all that stuff on social media as well, and let us know what you think. It's been a pleasure talking with Mike, and I hope you found it helpful. Let us know. Take care and God bless. See you later.